Hi, I'm Joel Wilson, and welcome to the Unknown Joys podcast. As we've been recording these episodes, it's been clear that it's usually quite simple things that give people joy. Wild swimming, a precious piece of jewelry, a card game, anything can spark that joy. In this episode, my conversation partner is Shelley.
Welcome, Ian, to Unknown Joys. Could you just quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Shelley and I'm a primary school teacher in Birmingham. I've lived here for about 18 years now, and I've got a wife called Katie and then two girls who are aged 3 and 5.
Your chosen subject, or your love, is listening. You're a host of a project called Stories of the Spirit. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so that sort of grew out of the first lockdown. I love listening to people and talking with people in Birmingham in particular. And then obviously when you're locked down, you have to get used to things like Zoom and social media. The whole idea was mostly actually to spend the time listening to people about their lives and their beliefs. There were people I spoke to who were Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant, and also people who don't really like particular titles, but they believe in Jesus.
Listening is an art form, but when did you first discover that there was more to listening than just looking at someone intently?
I started teacher training in 2003, so I've been a teacher for about 14 years now. And one of the reasons why I liked working with children in primary school and in school contexts was that you never quite know what they're going to say, and you can ask a question that you think you know the answer to, or you think there's only one answer, and then you suddenly find out a bit more about the child's worldview and their perceptions, and often things that they notice that as an adult I've kind of lost that kind of innocence, or I've lost the first impression of something, like even something as simple as trees and leaves and wind and things like that. You know, you get so used to something you can lose the excitement of it. And so listening to children and providing space for that as well helped me to see there's often different perspectives on very complicated things as well as on simple everyday things. And then actually that overflowed into conversations with adults, and how often I could miss some amazing insights that someone else might have if I was too busy talking. So it's, a thing I learned is to provide space for listening, and I really enjoy, it's really fun. So it probably takes a while to realise, and I'm still learning how to listen well, but I think perhaps the best way to listen for me is to try not to interrupt too much and to give someone time to really communicate and say what they'd like to say. But that does take time.
So that giving of space is one of those keys to good listening. What do you think are the other keys to being a good listener?
Thinking every single person is interesting, but some people hide that quite well. If that makes sense. So some people hide it well, so you have to kind of work a little bit harder to find out what it is that makes them really interesting and unique, because everyone is unique. Everyone's one of a kind, and everyone's made in God's image, so there's something about God that's reflected in that person. Often I think asking the right questions then that just follow up or help me clarify something that person said, or even just asking them about their lives. And if someone says they grew up in Ethiopia and then they travelled around in Ireland and Scotland and then they settled in Birmingham or something, you suddenly get a little bit more of an idea of where they're coming from just by asking a few more questions about them, about who they are, and then you start to understand a little bit more about their perspective. So providing space, asking questions, and I think actually you can only really ask good questions if you've listened to the bit they were talking about, because then it naturally follows up and digs a little bit deeper, and trying not to allow first impressions to get in the way of interpreting what someone might say, or kind of predicting what they might say.
Can you think about a conversation, maybe one of the stories of the spirit conversations, where you just gave some extra space and else something else came out of that?
A really easy one with an interview or something has been closing it with, is there anything else you would really like to share? Because I often find it kind of frustrates people if they feel like they were wanting to say something and then they didn't get the opportunity to. It gives them that space, and sometimes I ask that question, and it takes a few seconds, and to me it feels like a long time. It's probably only 5 seconds, and you feel like you want to fill that space, and actually it's just giving them time to actually say it, you know. And one thing I find unlocks things is if I say to people, even on the high street, in the shops, on the bus, whatever, pre-COVID times, can I pray for you for anything? And often that unlocks something. There's like a permission for them to be quite open and honest. So immediately you go to a deeper level of trust. And I don't know, I think perhaps by already listening to someone, you're showing them you are trustworthy, almost, to not be trying to control their conversation.
You did talk about that, the notion of like what feels like a long time when it's maybe just 5 seconds or so. That's quite a profound thing, really, where it says something about, you know, just where we're at right now in culture is like 5 seconds feels like a long time to give space. Are there particular heroes in listening, people that either you've interacted with that you think, wow, I'd like to be able to listen like them? Or maybe it's just listening to Radio 4 and you go, wait a moment, that interviewer is particularly good at drawing out stuff.
Bizarrely, the person who came to mind is Graham Norton, because obviously he does, like you mentioned, radio, but also TV. And one of his main things that comes to mind is his talk show, where actually when you've got 3 or 4 guests, usually 3, I think, who may not know each other at all, and they're probably a little bit nervous because they're famous for a particular reason, and so they want to do a good job of being interesting to be, you know, to be heard on TV. They also want to make sure they're not saying anything that's going to be bad for their reputation, and that and he has a very good way of actually, and people often comment and say how they feel really relaxed and actually they have fun on that show. And he's very gracious with his time, with the percentage of time of talking, very gracious with having done the research in advance and also allowing people time to speak and for their voices to be heard. And that's quite I wouldn't expect to have said that to you today, but that has really struck me. And there are obviously plenty of other good listeners for very different reasons to that.
Great answer. Let's talk about listening to God, and how is that different to other forms of listening for you?
Like we mentioned earlier, the thing about space, and also what might seem like a long time in reality is only 5 seconds. I think often with prayer that can be the case. It feels like, gosh, this is a long time I'm praying for, and then you look at the clock, it's been 2 minutes. Other times it can go by really quickly, it's been half an hour. You do still have the same number of hours a day that you're awake for, even if you're busy for the whole time. So it's about learning the discipline of making space in your own thoughts as you are doing your busy things, and making space for God to speak to me and to guide me, or just to, just to have a chat and not necessarily anything profound, or just to help me notice things, like we said earlier with listening to children and giving space and being surprised by some of the simple things they notice, that we take for granted. And by giving God space in my thoughts, sometimes I will notice people, or I'll notice situations, or I'll notice things about nature as well. So in those cases, it might be that I don't hear a particular train of thought in my head, but I'm just more perceptive and aware of things around me and more thankful for them. Sometimes I come home from work and I notice an amazing sky above me, and the sky is actually taking up most of the space around me. But I've been so busy focused on the things right in front of me, I haven't noticed this huge thing. I've taken it for granted. And I think that can be the same with God's voice. You know, we can be so busy focusing on the things in front of us that there's this huge presence of God. God is with us wherever we go. And sometimes we can feel like we've gone the whole day and we haven't been aware of him at all. And people will become aware of God in different ways. But it, again, making space for that in the day, even starting the day with a short prayer, Lord, show me more of you today, is a really helpful way just to open us up to that.
Well, we're gonna finish this interview with a quick 3 favorites. Okay. First of all, in this trio of favorites, what would you say is your favorite sound?
My favorite sound is, the moment you said that, is the resounding sound of a drum. I just love how you can have all sorts of things going on, and when you've got drums, you always hear the drums, even if there's other things, even if there's other sounds and noise and people cheering and dancing, you always hear the sound of the drum underneath. And yeah, it kind of really provides a base for everything else.
Can you tell us your favorite song?
I listen to so many songs and so many different songs, and it depends on the mood. Yeah, I actually can't answer that.
Can you tell us a particular a voice that you particularly like to listen to?
So the one, again, I think I've just got to go with what comes into my head first. What came into my head was Morgan Freeman's voice, particularly from Shawshank Redemption in the 90s. You hear different gravelly tones and textures, and him in particular being intentional about, right, so how do I do justice to the words that I'm saying and communicating, and also the pauses as well. Yeah, when you realise you can communicate and create an emotion just on how you use your voice, I think suddenly you're opened up to a much bigger world, and then you're also more able to hear that when you're listening to other people as well.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for being a guest on this show, and hopefully I'll get to see you face to face at some point. We can have a conversation with lots of meaningful pauses.
Oh, thank you so much.
What a great conversation partner. Just someone who's grasped the art of listening. Loads of notes there on good listening practice. It's definitely worth listening or watching Ian's Stories of the Spirit podcast, which was his 1-year project, and it's featured on YouTube and Spotify. If you have something or someone that gives you joy and you'd like to talk about it on the podcast, or if you've got some feedback, drop us an email at contact@birminghammethodistcircuit.org.uk. You can find this podcast on Anchor and YouTube. Bye for now, and do lean into the joy.